And welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. We are visiting with Dawn Catalano. She is from Mathnasium of Belden Village. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing great. We're so happy you could be with us this morning. Very interested to hear more about Mathnasium. First of all, what is it, Dawn?
Mathnasium is a math-only learning center. So we take kids in from kindergarten through adult, and we teach them how to do math.
So, okay, well, then that's very self-explanatory. Why did you hone in just on math rather than learning abilities altogether?
Because there's a lot of kids out there that struggle only with math or that excel and want to do better in math. And if we concentrate just on doing math and don't worry about the other subjects out there, we can specialize in that particular subject and help kids get better and excel.
If you get better at math, does that help you get better at other subjects?
Absolutely. One of the first things that we see happen when a student comes in is that their self-esteem increases because they may have been down on themselves about being unable to do it, and now all of a sudden they realize that they can do it, and it's really not that hard. And so their self-esteem increases, and so that helps with things across the board. And also when they start working on problem solving in mathematics, it helps with reading comprehension and problem solving in other subject areas too.
That's so interesting. I really always thought that it took a certain kind of brain to be more attuned to math type learning and another kind of brain orientation where you were more communicative and those kind of maybe more artsy, creative. Can you do both? You can unlock your way into that math part of the brain?
Absolutely, because we can teach it to them in a way that it makes sense. Not everybody is in that realm of memorizing things and being able to just stuff in and regurgitate it later. And if you learn something in a way that it makes sense and you learn it conceptually, then it's really hard to forget it. But if you're just trying to memorize something to take the next test or the next quiz, then those things easily just go right out of your mind.
You're saying something I've always thought, that we just all learn differently.
Yes.
And we're very uniquely made, each one of us, and we do learn differently. Aren't there some things, though, that you just have to memorize? I'm thinking of tables and, multiplication tables, those kinds of things. Or do you not have to memorize those?
Well, you don't really have to memorize them. There are some that it's very, very useful to memorize. But once we get those in, we have strategies that we can soundboard off of those into the next subject. And so, like, for instance, when you're learning how to do addition, and when you learn the things that make up 10, and then you go to add over 10, then we have strategies for doing that.
Oh,
and
fun
when
little
you're
tricks.
doing multiplication tables, if you know, like, all of your 2s and your 5s, then we can use strategies to spring off of those into doing the other ones. And eventually, after they do them over and over, they're going to stick with them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's overwhelming in the beginning if they can't memorize them all. So they need some strategy in order to figure it out.
And you're able to give them these tools.
Yes.
I've had so many friends who have children or grandchildren that are now learning Common Core, and they're absolutely baffled by it. Do you see more business with Common Core or less? Is it helping, or does it depend on the person again?
Well, it basically depends on the curriculum. Common Core is just a set of standards, and they're actually very good standards, and they are supposed to be across the board. There is a problem with that because every student at a certain age probably shouldn't be learning the same thing at the same
learn
time.
differently, right.
But outside of that, the Common Core standards are meant to teach students conceptual math so that they can later on apply it. And that's how Mathnasium has always taught math.
Okay.
We teach it from a very conceptual standpoint, and we use scaffolding so that students can learn visually, kinesthetically, how to do these things, excuse me, and then move on from there.
Help me understand, what does scaffolding mean, and what does learning conceptually mean?
We teach them why they're doing what they're doing instead of just teaching the steps of an algorithm. Eventually, they're going to learn how to use that algorithm, but that's not the first step to learning how to do something. So if you're teaching a student how to, do some subtraction with borrowing, you have to talk about place value. You have to get them to understand what it is they're borrowing when they're borrowing, instead of just going through the steps and using little somebody said to me the other day about borrowing from the milkman to move this, and I'm like, what? Because you have to talk about you're borrowing from the tens place and moving those 10 ones into the ones place. You can't talk about the milkman because the kid's not going to have any idea what it is they're doing.
Okay. All right. So that getting it to make sense is what you're after. Then I'm seeing. Okay. Yes. And everybody comes to you at all different levels. Mm-hmm. I think math can be very intimidating to people who don't feel naturally inclined to be mathematical. So I'm guessing one of the first things you do is make a person feel unjudged and at home. Talk about how you do that.
Absolutely. Before we ever bring a student in to evaluate them, we like them to come in for a trial session. They come into our center and do just like a visit like any other student would. They come in for that hour, and our staff greets them, and they get popcorn, and they get a sucker. They get a punch card where they get rewarded for everything that they do. And we give them things that are at their level so that they can feel accomplished. And even if they don't quite know how to do it, we show them our methods of being able to teach them how to do it, and they right away get that sense of, wow, this is something that I can do. Math is not impossible. Sometimes kids are 2, 3, 4 years behind grade level. And that makes them feel like, okay, I can learn how to do this. And then we invite them back in to do the evaluation so that the student's their first experience is not just to sit down in front of a test and say, oh, wow, I don't know how to do this stuff.
You must see such transformation take place in a person when they come to you, and as they start to find out I can do this and they start to do better in school. Can you touch on that just a little bit?
I do. And better in school, the grades are not the first thing that you're going to see come up. The first thing is that self-esteem piece.
Wow, well, that's worth its weight in gold right there, right?
And when the students come to me and I do that initial assessment and I sit down and share with the parents, what their strengths are and what their learning opportunities are. And then we build that learning plan for them, and they come in to our center and they work through that learning plan. And after usually about 3 months' time, I reassess those students, and we look at the difference in that initial assessment and what they did the next time. And the results are very dramatic. Sometimes unbelievable to myself. Mm-hmm. But, many students just do so much better in just that short 3 months time period.
I love that you just said something. You didn't say what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. You said what their strengths are and what their learning opportunities are. That tells me that everyone can do this. You must truly believe that.
I do.
I know people who have chosen their careers because there were fewer math courses required for them. You're saying that maybe they went a different direction, or that this really was something that everyone can do, and then it's never too late?
It is never too late. I've had students in my center. I had one woman who was retired, and she was going back to finish up her degree in college, and she was retirement age. Mm-hmm. And she came in and I helped her out for a few sessions so she could go take that math course and finish up that degree.
To do the math part.
Yeah, it's never too late to do that. What I do find is that I do get quite a few college-age students in there. What happens throughout the high school years is that kids become very calculator dependent. And if they end up in a remedial math course, some of the local colleges, I know from experience, in the remedial math courses, they are not allowed to use a calculator for like the first part of it. And it's all online. So they're in a classroom setting with just a person, a moderator in there, and they're learning offline, and they're not allowed to use a calculator to do the work. And the students are very, very calculator dependent. So a lot of them end up dropping out of school just because they can't get through that math.
There's so many of us who are calculator dependent. I'm thinking of just, we're not that far past tax season. I can't imagine if we would be required to do the math ourselves. What would you call functional literacy as far as math for what a person really ought to be able to do. Balance a checkbook, I'm sure. Be able to keep track of their finances. And so what do we need to be able to get along? And when do we need to come to you?
Most people don't balance their checkbooks anymore because everything is online.
Yes.
Instantly,
Yes.
you can
Guilty.
just look at it. But being able to understand how mortgage interest works and understand how credit card debt works, and to understand if you're going to go purchase something, a large purchase like a house or a car, what you're getting yourself into. And being able to look at that yourself just without depending upon somebody else sitting there and telling you, yeah, this is how it is. You should be able to understand those dollar figures. And I think that's kind of the most important thing, being able to make sure, not necessarily count change if you're the person that's, working behind the register, but making sure that you get the right amount of money back when they hand it to you. Make sure you're being charged correctly. Those sorts of things are just general life skills. But we also use like algebra in our everyday lives, and we don't think about it.
Do we? How do we?
If you're trying to calculate how to get carpeting for your house and how much it's going to cost you, or things like that, where you're figuring out, square footage and area and all of those things. All of that is like algebraic equations and algebraic thinking.
What about trigonometry? What about logarithms? What are some of these things do we really need those?
Well, I used to always tell my students when I was a high school teacher, I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know what you're going to be doing for the next 50 years of your life. But what if you decide you want to go into something like architecture or astronomy or something where you are going to use those things? And so every student should at least be introduced to those so that they understand, what it's all about. Because maybe that's going to click something and they're going to be like, yeah, I want to go do this.
Where does math fit into brain health? Because I had an aunt that lived to be 103 years old. She attributed that to A, never getting married, and kidding, and B, the fact that she was a math teacher for like 50 or 60 years of her life, and she hung in there a long, long time and lived to be 103, and she was always with it. That was one thing that did not deteriorate as she became weaker physically. Her brain was alive and well. Did math have anything to do with that?
It very well could have. I mean, they do say that you need to exercise your brain. And I mean, I've always been like that. I'm always a person that wants to work on puzzles and try to figure things out and play word games and anything that's going to, exercise my brain. That's just what I always do. But within the realm of Mathnasium, I'm always stopping students from like going to do an algorithm to do something that I know they can do in their head and walk them through how they can do this mentally. And so we don't let them use calculators.
Wow.
Some high school students, when they're doing the harder stuff, are allowed to pick up a calculator, but really we don't yet let them use calculators. So everything's either algorithm or mental math. And I have some students that have been with me for a while that would rather not use the calculator because they found out that it is easy to do it without it, and you can make mistakes. I make mistakes on the calculator all the time.
Punch the wrong number or something, yes.
And having math sense is going to let you know whether you got the right answer or not.
Yes.
When the calculator spits out the answer, you can't just write it down. You have to make sure that, it makes sense.
Yes. And what I hear you saying is they're using calculators. It's the God-given one right between their ears.
Yes.
So put right in there, and you're teaching them how to use it most efficiently. We need to take a short break. We'll be back with Dawn after these words. You're listening to Our Community.